Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Murder Beneath Westminster Bridge. Chapter 1. The Body in the Tide. In the autumn of 1894, London wore its customary mantle of fog. The yellow vapour drifted along the Thames like a living thing, swallowing gas lamps and softening the outlines of buildings, until the city appeared less a place of stone and brick than a vast dream suspended between earth and sky. The river moved silently beneath Westminster Bridge, its dark waters carrying secrets toward the sea. It was upon one such evening that a mystery came into our lives, a mystery so extraordinary that even now, after many years have passed, I find myself hesitant to place the facts before the public. At the time, I was seated opposite Sherlock Holmes in our rooms at Baker Street. The great detective reclined in his armchair, long fingers pressed together beneath his sharp chin, while the glow of the fire cast shifting shadows across his gaunt features. Upon the table beside him rested a chemical apparatus, a Persian slipper containing tobacco, and several newspapers folded with military precision. Holmes had spent the greater portion of the day in silence. Experience had taught me not to disturb him during such periods. His mind, when deprived of a worthy problem, often turned inward with an intensity that rendered ordinary conversation impossible. The quiet was finally broken by Holmes himself. "Watson," said he suddenly. "Yes? You have been contemplating whether Mrs. Hudson's nephew resembles his mother." I stared at him. "Holmes?" He smiled faintly. "The matter appears to astonish you." "It certainly does. My dear fellow, the chain is elementary." "Then pray explain it." You glanced toward the window after hearing the young man's voice in the hall. You then examined the photograph of Mrs. Hudson upon the mantelpiece. Your expression suggested comparison rather than admiration. Finally, you nodded to yourself. Therefore, you concluded that nephew and aunt possess similar features. I laughed. "Remarkable." "Not remarkable. Merely observation." He closed his eyes. "Unfortunately, observation is wasted when there is nothing worth observing." I had heard this complaint before. Surely London contains crime enough to occupy you. Crime? Yes. Originality? No. At that moment, footsteps sounded upon the stairs. A hurried knock followed. Before either of us could answer, Mrs. Hudson entered. "Inspector Lestrade to see you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes sat upright instantly. "Ah, there speaks opportunity." The inspector entered a moment later. His face, usually marked by confidence bordering upon stubbornness, bore an expression I had rarely witnessed. He looked troubled. "Gentlemen." "Good evening, Lestrade," said Holmes. "You appear disturbed." "I am." "Then the matter promises to be interesting." Lestrade removed his gloves. "I should not have come if it were not necessary." Holmes gestured toward a chair. "You have my attention." The inspector remained standing. "A body was discovered this morning beneath Westminster Bridge." Holmes yawned. "A regrettably common occurrence." "This one is not common." The detective's eyes sharpened. "Oh?" "The dead man was murdered." "Continue." "There were no wounds." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "No wounds?" "None." "Poison?" "We thought so at first." "And now?" Lestrade hesitated. "The doctors cannot determine how he died." For the first time that evening, genuine interest appeared upon Holmes's face. Indeed. The victim was identified as Sir Alistair Pencombe. I recognized the name immediately. Sir Alistair was a prominent financier whose investments stretched across the empire. Newspapers frequently reported his business dealings, and his fortune was said to be immense. "A man of influence," I observed. "Exactly," said Lestrade. "His disappearance would have caused a scandal. His murder may cause something worse." Holmes rose. "When was he last seen alive?" 3 nights ago." "Where?" "At a dinner held in Belgravia." "And his body was discovered beneath Westminster Bridge this morning." "Yes." "By whom?" "A river worker." Holmes crossed to the fireplace. "What makes you certain murder was involved?" Lestrade reached into his pocket. "Because this was found." He produced a small object wrapped in cloth. Holmes unfolded it carefully. Inside lay a silver coin. At first glance it appeared ordinary. Then I noticed a peculiar mark engraved upon one side. A single black triangle. Nothing more. No initials, no words. Only the symbol. Holmes examined it beneath the lamp. Interesting. We found it clenched in the dead man's hand. Anything else? No. Money? Still in his pockets. Watch? Untouched. So robbery may be excluded. That is our conclusion. Holmes handed the coin back. And why has this troubled Scotland Yard so profoundly? Lestrade exhaled heavily. Because Sir Alistair is not the first. The room became silent. What do you mean? I asked. The inspector looked from me to Holmes. 3 months ago, a barrister named Frederick Marlowe was found dead near the embankment. Holmes listened without interruption. 6 weeks later, a retired naval officer was discovered in Kensington Gardens. And the doctors found no cause of death. I felt a chill despite the warmth of the fire. The same symbol? Holmes asked. Lestrade nodded. The same silver coin. For several moments no one spoke. The wind rattled against the windows. At last Holmes turned. 3 victims. Yes. No visible injuries. Correct. No known connection? None. The same token left behind each time. Lestrade nodded again. The newspapers know nothing of the earlier deaths. We kept the details confidential. A wise precaution. We hoped to identify the killer before panic spread. Holmes moved toward the window. Outside, Baker Street lay shrouded in mist. What have your investigations revealed? Very little. Suspects? None. Enemies? Hundreds. Holmes smiled. Then we are dealing with success rather than failure. What do you mean? A poor man possesses few enemies. A wealthy man acquires them naturally. Lestrade failed to appreciate the remark. I need your help, Holmes. The detective remained silent. When he finally spoke, his voice had acquired the distant quality that always signalled intense concentration. The body is presently where? At the Westminster mortuary. We shall examine it tomorrow morning. Lestrade appeared relieved. Excellent. There is one more question. Yes? The position of the body. The inspector frowned. What about it? How exactly was it found? Lestrade paused, face upward. Anything unusual? Only one thing. What? The tide should have carried it away. Holmes turned sharply. But it did not? No. Why not? Lestrade's expression darkened. Because someone had tied a length of silk cord around the victim's wrist. I leaned forward. A cord? Yes. Tied to what? The inspector swallowed. One of the stone supports beneath Westminster Bridge. Even Holmes appeared surprised. The murderer anchored the body? Exactly. Why? That, said Lestrade grimly, is precisely what we cannot understand. The clock upon the mantel struck 9. 9 slow notes echoed through Baker Street. Holmes stood motionless beside the window. I knew that look. The game had begun. And somewhere beyond the fog-shrouded streets of London, a murderer waited. One clever enough to leave no wound, no poison, no obvious clue. Nothing, save a silver coin marked with a black triangle. A symbol whose meaning none of us yet understood. Within 24 hours, Sherlock Holmes would discover the first crack in the mystery. Within a week, another man would die, and before the affair concluded, Westminster Bridge itself would reveal a secret hidden beneath its stones for more than 20 years. At that moment, however, we knew only this. A wealthy man had been murdered. No one knew how, no one knew why, and the river kept its silence. Chapter 2. A Whisper from the Mortuary. The following morning broke grey and cold. A fine drizzle hung over London, transforming the city into a landscape of glistening cobblestones and blurred silhouettes. Shortly after 8 o'clock, Holmes and I departed Baker Street in a hansom cab, bound for Westminster Mortuary. My companion had spoken little since the previous evening. When Holmes entered one of his reflective moods, questions rarely produced answers. He preferred to arrange facts silently, like pieces upon a chessboard whose full pattern remained hidden from everyone except himself. I therefore occupied myself by reviewing the known details. 3 victims, 3 unexplained deaths, 3 silver coins bearing the same black triangle, and now a wealthy financier discovered beneath Westminster Bridge, secured by silk cord to one of the bridge's ancient supports. The affair possessed an air of deliberate symbolism which I found deeply unsettling. Holmes finally broke the silence. "What is your impression of the matter, Watson?" "I confess I am uncertain." "Excellent. Excellent? A man becomes dangerous when he mistakes uncertainty for knowledge." I smiled. "You already possess a theory." "No. No. A suspicion. And the difference? A theory seeks to explain facts. A suspicion merely warns us where facts may eventually lead." The cab rolled onward through the damp streets. "Then what does your suspicion tell you?" "Only that someone wishes these deaths to be noticed." "The silver coins?" "Among other things." Before I could press him further, the cab halted before the mortuary. Inspector Lestrade awaited us near the entrance. He looked as though he had slept very little. "You are punctual," Holmes nodded. "And the body?" "Inside." Without further ceremony we entered. The mortuary occupied a plain stone building overlooking the river. Its interior smelled faintly of disinfectant and damp masonry. A medical examiner named Dr. Hawthorne greeted us. He was a tall, weary gentleman with silver spectacles and an expression suggesting prolonged frustration. "Mr. Holmes." "Doctor, you have come regarding Sir Alistair." "Indeed." The doctor led us into a private examination room. A sheet-covered form rested upon a metal table. The room felt unnaturally cold. Dr. Hawthorne folded his arms. "I shall admit immediately that this case has puzzled me." "Good," said Holmes. The doctor blinked. "Good? The most dangerous physician is one who believes himself incapable of error." Dr. Hawthorne appeared uncertain whether he had received a compliment. He pulled back the sheet. The face of Sir Alistair Pencombe emerged. Death had left surprisingly little mark upon his features. He appeared almost asleep. A respectable gentleman in late middle age, with neatly trimmed whiskers and a high forehead. Holmes stepped forward. For nearly 5 minutes he said nothing. He examined the face, the hands, the clothing, the shoes. Then, to my surprise, he produced a magnifying lens. Lestrade sighed. I knew that would appear sooner or later. Holmes ignored him. His attention had become fixed upon the victim's right hand. "Curious." "What is curious?" asked Lestrade. Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he carefully inspected each finger. Then he examined the left hand. Finally, he straightened. "Doctor, did Sir Alistair smoke?" "Occasionally." "Cigars?" "According to his servants." "Expensive cigars?" "Very." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. I could tell he had noticed something significant. "What is it?" I asked. "The fingers." "What about them?" "Observe." He pointed toward the dead man's right hand. I looked closely. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then I noticed a faint yellow discoloration upon 2 fingertips. "Tobacco stains?" "Exactly." Holmes then indicated the left hand. "Now compare." The discoloration appeared there as well. Lestrade frowned. "What of it?" "A man rarely smokes identical cigars with both hands." The inspector shrugged. "Perhaps he did. Perhaps." Holmes moved away. Whenever he used that particular tone, it usually meant the opposite. Dr. Hawthorne cleared his throat. "I found no poison." "No trace at all?" "None." "Heart condition?" "Nothing severe enough to explain sudden death." "Strangulation?" "No marks." "Internal bleeding?" "No." Holmes paced slowly around the table. "What killed him then?" The doctor spread his hands. "I wish I knew." The detective stopped. "Tell me, doctor, was there water in the lungs?" "A small amount." Lestrade immediately spoke. "Naturally. The body was found in the river." "Naturally," Holmes repeated. Again I recognized that peculiar tone. He turned abruptly. "How much water?" The doctor consulted his notes. "Less than expected." Holmes's eyes brightened. "Interesting. Why?" "Because a drowning victim usually presents certain characteristics. Sir Alistair was not drowned." "Precisely." A silence followed. Holmes resumed his examination. This time he focused upon the victim's coat. The garment was expensive and impeccably tailored. He inspected every button, every seam, every pocket. Nothing escaped his attention. Then suddenly he froze. For perhaps 3 seconds he remained motionless. A familiar sign. Holmes had found something. Yet when Lestrade stepped forward, the detective casually straightened and brushed an invisible speck from his sleeve. The moment passed, or seemed to. I noticed, however, that Holmes's expression had subtly changed. He had seen something, and he intended to keep it to himself. After another quarter hour, the examination concluded. Outside the mortuary, Lestrade looked impatient. "Well? Well, what? What have you discovered?" Holmes adjusted his gloves. "That Sir Alistair Pencombe is unquestionably dead," the inspector groaned. "Holmes! My dear Lestrade, facts must be established before conclusions. You found something, several things, and I should prefer additional evidence." The inspector muttered something under his breath. We had scarcely begun walking when a uniformed constable approached at a run. "Inspector!" Lestrade turned. "What is it?" "A message from headquarters." The constable handed him an envelope. Lestrade opened it. As he read, the colour drained slightly from his face. "What now?" I asked. He looked up. "Another coin." Holmes stopped walking. "Explain." "A gentleman reported receiving one this morning. The black triangle." "Yes." "Who received it?" Lestrade consulted the message. "A Mr. Jonathan Vane." The name meant nothing to me. Holmes, however, reacted instantly. "Jonathan Vane, the solicitor?" "I believe so." "Where does he live?" "Bloomsbury." Holmes's expression became thoughtful. "When did he receive the coin?" "Last night." "By post, apparently. Has he been threatened?" "We do not know." Holmes glanced toward me. "Watson, our morning has become more productive than expected." Within the hour, we were seated in another cab, racing toward Bloomsbury. As we travelled, Holmes remained unusually alert. His gaze drifted repeatedly toward the streets outside. Finally I spoke. "You know this Jonathan Vane?" "Only by reputation." "What sort of reputation?" "He administers estates for several influential families." "That seems harmless enough." "Many dangerous things seem harmless." The cab stopped before a handsome Georgian residence. A servant admitted us immediately. We were shown into a study lined with books. Its owner stood waiting. Jonathan Vane appeared to be a man of perhaps 50 years. He possessed sharp features, careful manners, and restless eyes. The moment Holmes entered, I detected something peculiar. Not fear, not grief, expectation, as though he had been waiting specifically for Sherlock Holmes. "Mr. Holmes, you sent for Scotland Yard." "I did, and received a coin." "Yes." Vane produced a small object from his desk. My pulse quickened. It was another silver coin, another black triangle, precisely identical to the one discovered in Sir Alistair's hand. Holmes accepted it. "Tell me everything." Vane swallowed. "It arrived in a plain envelope." "No message?" "None." "When?" "Shortly after 9 o'clock last night." "Do you know Sir Alistair Pencombe?" The solicitor hesitated. "Only briefly, but Holmes noticed. So did I." "Yes." "You were acquainted?" "Professionally." "How well?" "Reasonably well." Holmes studied him. "Did you know the other victims?" Again the hesitation. This time slightly longer. The room suddenly felt very quiet. "Mr. Vane," said Holmes. The solicitor moistened his lips. Then he uttered words that transformed the entire investigation. "Yes." Lestrade stared. "You knew them?" "All three." "How?" Vane looked from one face to another. His voice had become almost a whisper. "Because 20 years ago, We all belong to the same society. A cold sensation passed through me. Holmes's eyes narrowed. What society? For a moment Vane seemed unwilling to answer. Then he spoke. The Westminster Circle. The name meant nothing, yet the effect upon the room was immediate. Jonathan Vane looked terrified, and for the first time since the case began, Sherlock Holmes appeared genuinely intrigued. "Mr. Vane," he said quietly, "I believe you have just told us the most important fact in this entire investigation." Outside, somewhere beyond the rain-streaked windows, the bells of Westminster began to ring, and with them came the first faint whisper of a secret buried for 2 decades. Chapter 3. The Westminster Circle. For several moments after Jonathan Vane uttered the words "the Westminster Circle," no one spoke. The rain tapped softly against the study windows, and somewhere in the house a clock measured the passing seconds with relentless precision. Holmes stood motionless beside the solicitor's desk. I had often witnessed that peculiar stillness. To the casual observer, it suggested inactivity. In reality, it signaled the exact opposite. Holmes's mind was moving at tremendous speed. At last he spoke. "The Westminster Circle." Vane nodded uneasily. "Yes. And what precisely was this organization?" The solicitor lowered himself into a chair. "An association of gentlemen." Lestrade snorted. "Half of London belongs to associations of gentlemen. This one was different. How?" Vane folded his hands. For the first time I noticed that they trembled slightly. "It was private." "Private in what sense?" Holmes asked. "In every sense." The solicitor looked toward the fire. "There were only 7 members." "7? Yes." "And all influential men?" "Very." Holmes remained silent. Vane continued. "We met once each month." "Where?" "At various locations." "For what purpose?" Again hesitation appeared. The man seemed reluctant to proceed. "Mr. Vane," Holmes said quietly, "3 members of your society are dead." The solicitor swallowed. "I understand. Then begin at the beginning." Vane exhaled slowly. "The Westminster Circle was formed in 1874. By whom?" "Sir Alistair Pencombe, the latest victim." "Yes. Who else belonged?" Vane stared into the flames. "Alistair Pencombe." He raised one finger. "Frederick Marlowe." A second finger. "Captain Edgar Holloway." A third. "The 3 men who are now dead." Holmes nodded. "And the remaining 4. Benjamin Sloane. Occupation? Industrialist. Continue." "Dr. Nathaniel Gryce. A physician." "Yes." "Next." "Henry Locksley." The name appeared familiar. After a moment, I remembered why. A prominent member of Parliament. "And the 7th?" Holmes asked. For a moment, Vane said nothing. Then, "Arthur Blackwood." The room became silent once more. Holmes watched him carefully. "Why do you pause before speaking that name?" The solicitor looked up. "Because Arthur Blackwood disappeared." "Disappeared? 20 years ago." I leaned forward. "Under what circumstances?" "No one knows." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "No one?" Vane shook his head. "He simply vanished. Without explanation." "Yes." "When?" "September of 1875. Holmes glanced toward Lestrade. The inspector's expression revealed the same conclusion forming in my own mind. 1 member vanished. 20 years later, the remaining members began dying. It was impossible not to suspect a connection. Holmes, however, appeared unconvinced. "What was Blackwood's profession?" "Barrister." "Married?" "No." "Financial difficulties?" "Not that I know." "Enemies?" The solicitor laughed bitterly. "He was a barrister. Of course he had enemies." Holmes smiled faintly. "A fair answer." He moved toward the bookshelves. "What distinguished this society from dozens of others?" Vane hesitated. "The Circle had a rule." "A rule?" "Absolute secrecy." "Concerning what?" "Our meetings." "And what occurred during these meetings?" The solicitor looked uncomfortable. "We discussed matters of influence." Lestrade frowned. "Influence? Politics? Finance? Legal affairs? Nothing illegal." Certainly not. Yet the speed of the answer immediately attracted Holmes's attention. I recognized the slight narrowing of his eyes. A lie, or at least something less than complete truth. The detective altered his approach. Who kept the records? Records? Minutes. Correspondence. Membership documents. There were none. Holmes stopped. None? No written records existed. Interesting. Secrecy was considered essential. The detective nodded thoughtfully. How many people knew of the circle? Very few. And yet someone is murdering its members. Apparently. Holmes turned suddenly. When did you first connect the deaths? Vane looked startled. I beg your pardon? You recognized the pattern before yesterday. The solicitor stared. What makes you think so? Because you were not surprised. The man said nothing. Holmes continued. When Sir Alistair died, you already suspected the connection. Vane's shoulders slumped. Yes. Lestrade looked annoyed. You neglected to mention that. I wasn't certain. When did you become suspicious? After Captain Holloway's death. Why then? The solicitor stood and crossed to a cabinet. After unlocking a drawer, he removed an envelope. Its paper had yellowed with age. I received this 6 weeks ago. He handed it to Holmes. Inside lay a single sheet. Nothing was written upon it except one sentence. The circle will be completed. No signature, no date, no explanation. Holmes read the words twice. Then he passed the paper to me. I felt a chill. The sentence possessed an eerie certainty, not a threat, a promise. When did this arrive? Holmes asked. The day after Captain Holloway died. And you informed no one. I thought it was a prank. Did you indeed? The solicitor lowered his eyes. No. What did you think? For several seconds, Vane remained silent. Then he spoke. I thought Arthur Blackwood had returned. The statement hung in the air. Even Lestrade appeared unsettled. A dead man? The inspector asked. We never proved he was dead. You never proved he was alive either. No. Holmes resumed examining the letter. What reason would Blackwood have for revenge? At this question, Vane became visibly nervous. His fingers tightened around the back of a chair. I never said revenge. You implied it. The solicitor looked away. Holmes approached him slowly. Mr. Vane. Yes? There is something you have not told us. The man said nothing. Something important. Still silence. Something connected with Arthur Blackwood. The solicitor's face had grown pale. I cannot discuss it. Cannot or will not? Vane did not answer. Holmes sighed. My dear sir, secrecy ceases to be admirable when it assists a murderer. For an instant I thought the solicitor might finally reveal everything. Instead he shook his head. No. The detective regarded him thoughtfully. Very well. To my surprise, he abandoned the subject entirely. A few minutes later we departed. Once outside, Lestrade exploded. Why did you let him stop? Holmes adjusted his coat against the rain. Because pressing him further would have achieved nothing. He knows something. Obviously. Then we should compel him to speak. Holmes smiled. My dear Lestrade, people reveal more when they believe themselves unwatched. The inspector groaned. There you go again. Indeed. We walked slowly toward Russell Square. Rain drifted through the bare branches of the trees. I glanced toward Holmes. You believe Vane is hiding a crime? No. Then what? A shame. The answer surprised me. A shame. Observe the distinction, Watson. Guilt concerns what one has done. Shame concerns what one has permitted. Before I could ask another question, Holmes suddenly stopped. His gaze had fixed itself upon something across the square. What is it? I asked. Without answering, he began walking rapidly. We followed. At the far side of the street stood a newspaper vendor. Nothing unusual there. Beside him, however, stood a man in a dark overcoat. The fellow possessed a thick beard and wore a low hat. At first glance he seemed entirely ordinary, yet the moment Holmes approached, the stranger turned sharply. Then he walked away, Fast. Stop! Lestrade shouted. The man immediately broke into a run. Holmes pursued him. The chase carried us through rain-slick streets and crowded pavements. Twice, we nearly lost sight of him. Then, quite suddenly, he vanished. One moment he was ahead. The next he was gone. We searched nearby alleys. Nothing. No trace. No witness could tell us where he had gone. Lestrade cursed furiously. Holmes, however, seemed strangely satisfied. "You know him?" I asked. "No." "Then why pursue him?" The detective reached into his pocket. He produced a small object, a silver coin. A black triangle gleamed upon its surface. "Because," said Holmes quietly, "he dropped this." I stared. Another coin. A fourth. The detective turned it over. His eyes narrowed. Then, for the briefest instant, genuine surprise crossed his face. "What is it?" I asked. Holmes handed me the coin. Unlike the others, this one contained a tiny additional marking, a number, barely visible, the numeral 7. "The 7th member," I whispered. Holmes said nothing, but as we stood there beneath the falling rain, holding the mysterious coin, I knew the investigation had entered an entirely new phase. Someone was watching us. Someone knew about the Westminster Circle, and someone had just made the first mistake of the entire case, a mistake Sherlock Holmes would not forget. Chapter 4. The 7th Coin. The silver coin remained upon our sitting-room table long after we returned to Baker Street. For nearly an hour, Holmes studied it beneath a powerful lens, while I occupied my customary chair beside the fire. Outside, rain drummed steadily against the windows, and London seemed wrapped in a curtain of mist and shadow. The coin itself appeared nearly identical to the others. The same size, the same weight, the same black triangle engraved upon one face. Yet the tiny numeral hidden along its edge transformed its significance entirely. 7. The number corresponding exactly to the original membership of the Westminster Circle. Holmes examined the edge once more. Then he leaned back. "Interesting." I laughed. "That word from you generally indicates something extraordinary." "Quite true. What do you make of it?" "The number was not added recently." "How can you tell?" "The wear is consistent." He handed me the lens. "Observe the grooves." I inspected them. Even to my untrained eye, the engraving appeared old. Very old. "Then all the coins may have numbers?" "Precisely." "One for each member?" Holmes nodded. "A reasonable assumption." I considered the implication. If that is true, Sir Alister's coin may have carried his own number, or someone else's. "You never make anything simple, Holmes. My dear Watson, reality rarely accommodates simplicity." At that moment, Mrs. Hudson entered carrying a tray. "Your tea, gentlemen." "Thank you, Mrs. Hudson." She hesitated. "There's been another gentleman asking after you." Holmes looked up instantly. "Describe him." "A respectable fellow. Age, 40 perhaps. Height, medium. Facial hair, a beard." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. "The same man?" "I couldn't say." "When did he call?" "Half an hour ago." "What did he want?" "He asked whether you were home." "And?" "I told him no." Holmes nodded approvingly. "Excellent." After Mrs. Hudson departed, he rose and crossed to the window. "You anticipated this?" I asked. "Certainly." "How?" "The man in Russell Square was observing us." "You think he followed us?" "I know he did." "Then why not arrest him?" Holmes smiled. "Arrest him for walking?" I could not help laughing. Lestrade often accused Holmes of enjoying mysteries more than solutions. On occasions such as this, I suspected there was truth in the charge. The detective returned to the table. "Watson, what is the first principle of investigation?" "Observation? No," I sighed. "You will tell me regardless. Always determine who benefits." He tapped the coin. "Consider our victims." "Very well. Sir Alister Pencombe, a wealthy financier. Frederick Marlowe, a barrister. Captain Holloway, a retired naval officer." Holmes folded his hands. "What unites them?" "The Westminster Circle." Beyond that, I thought carefully. Age, good. Influence, better. Money, excellent. The detective nodded. All three possessed influence, resources, and established reputations, which suggests that their deaths are connected to something old. I frowned. Old? Old grievances become powerful when nurtured for decades. The fire crackled softly. Holmes's gaze drifted toward the flames. 20 years, he spoke almost to himself. Long enough for anger to mature, or for evidence to disappear. Precisely. Before further discussion could occur, a knock sounded below. Moments later, hurried footsteps approached. Inspector Lestrade entered without ceremony. His expression alone informed us that something had happened. Bad news. Holmes sighed. I was afraid of that. You expected it. I feared it. Lestrade removed his hat. Benjamin Sloane has vanished. The words struck the room like a gunshot. The industrialist? I asked. Yes. When? Holmes demanded. Last night. The detective stood instantly. Explain. Sloane failed to attend an important meeting this morning. And his servants investigated. Lestrade paused. His bed had not been slept in. Holmes's face hardened. Any sign of struggle? None. Any message? No. The silver coin. The inspector nodded grimly. Found on his desk. For several seconds no one spoke. Another member of the circle. Another coin. The pattern continued. How many remain? Holmes asked. Jonathan Vane. Yes. Dr. Nathaniel Gryce. 3. Henry Locksley. Holmes nodded slowly. 3 living members. Assuming Sloane is alive. The detective did not answer. His silence troubled me more than any spoken reply. Within half an hour, we were on our way to Sloane's residence in Kensington. The house reflected its owner's wealth. A magnificent structure of stone and glass stood behind iron gates. Servants moved nervously throughout the premises. The butler received us in the library. Sloane's study is this way. The room appeared untouched. Documents covered the desk. Financial reports lay stacked neatly beside correspondence. Nothing suggested a sudden disappearance. Holmes began examining the room immediately. His movements possessed the swift precision of a hunting animal. Every object received scrutiny. Every surface, every drawer. Meanwhile, Lestrade questioned the servants. I wandered toward the desk. There, resting atop a leather blotter, lay another silver coin. The black triangle gleamed beneath the afternoon light. This must be it. Holmes approached. Yes. He picked it up. Then his eyes narrowed. Aha! What now? A number. My pulse quickened. Which one? He handed me the coin. The numeral engraved along the edge was clearly visible. 5. 5, I said. Holmes nodded. Interesting. Why? The sequence is becoming clearer. Before he could elaborate, a cry came from across the room. Lestrade stood beside a bookshelf. Holmes, we hurried over. What is it? The inspector pointed. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed a narrow gap between 2 shelves. A hidden compartment. Holmes immediately knelt. A concealed panel had been left slightly ajar. Inside rested a single object. A leather-bound notebook. Its cover bore no title, no initials, nothing. Holmes opened it carefully. The first pages contained financial calculations, then correspondence, then names. Dozens of names, some familiar, some not. Suddenly Holmes stopped turning pages. What is it? I asked. He handed me the notebook. A particular entry had been marked. Written in dark ink were 7 names. Sir Alistair Pencombe, Frederick Marlowe, Captain Edgar Holloway, Benjamin Sloane, Jonathan Vane, Dr. Nathaniel Gryce, Henry Locksley. Below them appeared another, separated from the rest, Arthur Blackwood. Beside Blackwood's name, someone had written a single sentence. The debt remains unpaid. I felt a chill. When was this written? Lestrade asked. Holmes examined the ink. Recently. The inspector swore softly. This is a death list. Perhaps. Perhaps. Holmes closed the notebook. My dear Lestrade, certainty remains premature. You see 7 names and a threat. I see 7 names and a statement. What's the difference? A threat predicts the future. Holmes slipped the notebook into his coat. A statement may describe the past. Those words remained in my mind as we departed the house. For the remainder of the journey, Holmes spoke very little. The case had clearly entered a new stage. Someone was not merely killing members of the circle, someone was judging them. The distinction, though subtle, seemed enormously important. Night had fallen by the time we reached Baker Street. The fog had returned. Great rolling banks of it drifted through the streets like ghosts. Holmes stood at the sitting-room window. Suddenly he froze. "What is it?" he pointed. Across Baker Street, partially concealed beneath a lamp, stood a solitary figure, a man, watching the house. The same height, the same beard, the same dark overcoat, the watcher from Russell Square. For perhaps 3 seconds he remained motionless. Then he turned and disappeared into the fog. Holmes snatched up his coat. "Come, Watson. You've identified him?" "No." "Then why pursue him?" The detective's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Because this time, my dear fellow, he wishes to be followed." Those words struck me as deeply ominous. For the first time since the investigation began, it seemed possible that the unseen enemy had stopped reacting to Holmes and had begun directing him. As we hurried down the stairs and into the fog-filled London night, neither of us realized that events already moving into place would lead before dawn to the discovery of a second body, nor that the dead man would be someone we had spoken to only hours earlier. Benjamin Sloane had vanished. By morning, he would be found, and with his death, the mystery of the Westminster Circle would become darker than ever. Chapter 5. Death at Blackfriars Steps. The fog swallowed London whole. As Holmes and I emerged from Baker Street, the city seemed transformed into a phantom landscape, where shapes appeared and vanished without warning. Gas lamps glowed like distant stars suspended in yellow mist, while the sounds of passing carriages arrived muffled and distorted. Ahead of us, somewhere within that shifting veil, moved the bearded stranger. Holmes advanced swiftly, not recklessly, never recklessly. His pace remained controlled, his eyes alert to every movement around us. Yet I sensed an unusual urgency. The mysterious watcher had appeared too often to be ignored. "Can you still see him?" I asked. "For the moment." The figure materialized briefly beneath a lamp at the far end of the street, then vanished once more. We crossed Marylebone Road, turned south, entered a maze of narrower streets. The stranger never ran. That fact struck me immediately. A guilty man might flee. This man merely stayed ahead of us, close enough to be seen, far enough to remain unreachable. "He's leading us," I said. "Yes." Holmes sounded almost pleased. "Then why follow?" "Because occasionally one learns more from a trap than from avoiding it." I was not entirely reassured. The chase continued for nearly 20 minutes. At last the stranger turned into a narrow alley near the Strand. We followed. The alley ended abruptly in a small courtyard. Empty. Completely empty. The man had disappeared. I stared in disbelief. "There is no exit." "On the contrary." Holmes pointed upward. A wooden ladder clung to the rear wall of a warehouse. The roof. We searched immediately. Nothing. No footsteps. No witnesses. No sign whatsoever. The stranger had vanished for the second time. Holmes examined the courtyard carefully. Then he crouched beside a rain barrel. "What have you found?" Instead of answering, he lifted a folded piece of paper. It had been tucked beneath a loose stone. A message. My pulse quickened. "For us?" "Almost certainly." Holmes unfolded the paper. Only a single sentence had been written. "The fourth debt is paid." Neither signature nor explanation accompanied the words. For several moments Holmes studied the note. Then he placed it carefully inside his pocketbook. "The fourth debt." I repeated the phrase. "Benjamin Sloane. Perhaps. You think he's dead?" "I fear it." The detective's voice had become grim. A moment later, distant church bells echoed through the fog. Midnight. We returned to Baker Street shortly thereafter. Neither of us slept particularly well. I was awakened shortly after 6 by hurried footsteps ascending the stairs. An urgent knock followed. Mrs. Hudson opened the door before I reached it. Inspector Lestrade entered. One glance at his face told me everything. "He's been found." Holmes emerged from his bedroom fully dressed. Apparently he had already risen. "Where?" "Blackfriars Steps." The detective nodded once. "Dead?" "Yes." No further explanation proved necessary. Within 30 minutes we were travelling toward the river. Blackfriars Steps descended toward the Thames through ancient stone terraces, darkened by centuries of weather and water. A crowd had gathered despite the early hour. Uniformed constables held curious onlookers at bay. The body lay beneath a canvas sheet. Lestrade led us forward. It was discovered by a dock worker. Holmes knelt immediately. The sheet was lifted. Benjamin Sloane stared upward at the grey morning sky. Death had frozen his features into an expression of profound surprise. The resemblance to Sir Alister's corpse was unmistakable. No wounds, no visible injuries, nothing obvious to explain death. Yet one detail differed, significantly. A silver coin rested upon the dead man's chest, not in his hand, displayed openly. Deliberately, Holmes examined it. "Number 5. Yes." Lestrade folded his arms. "The same as the coin from his study." "Interesting. Why?" "Because the murderer wishes us to understand the sequence." The inspector frowned. "What sequence?" Holmes did not answer. Instead, he examined the surrounding area. Blackfriars Steps descended almost directly into the river. Weathered stone walls flanked both sides. The location possessed a bleak, isolated atmosphere even during daylight. "What time was death estimated?" Holmes asked. The medical examiner stepped forward. "Sometime during the night." "Cause?" The doctor sighed. "I cannot say." "Again?" "I'm afraid so." The frustration in his voice was obvious. Holmes crouched beside the corpse. For nearly 10 minutes he conducted a meticulous examination. Then suddenly he became very still. I recognized the sign instantly. He had found something. This time, however, he did not conceal it. "Lestrade." "Yes?" "Look here." The inspector approached. Holmes pointed toward the victim's collar. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed a faint grey residue, almost like dust. "What is that?" I asked. Holmes rubbed a small amount between his fingers. "Coal. Coal." The detective nodded. "A very particular variety." Lestrade stared. "You can determine that." "With reasonable confidence." He stood. "Blackfriars Steps contain no such residue." "What does it mean?" "It means Benjamin Sloane died somewhere else." The inspector's eyes widened. "Then the body was moved." "Precisely. For the first time in the investigation, we possessed physical evidence connecting a victim to another location. The significance was enormous. Holmes spent the next hour studying the surrounding area. Eventually, he halted beside an iron mooring ring fixed into the stone. His expression sharpened. "What have you found now?" Without speaking, he pointed. A short length of dark silk thread clung to the metal, very similar to the cord used beneath Westminster Bridge. Lestrade swore softly. "The same murderer." "Undoubtedly." The detective carefully removed the fragment. Then he examined the stonework nearby. His eyes narrowed further. "What is it?" "Footprints." I looked. The recent rain had preserved several impressions in the mud. Most belonged to constables and dock workers. One, however, stood apart. A narrow boot. Unusually narrow. Holmes measured it silently. Then he smiled. A dangerous smile. "You know who it belongs to?" "No." "Then why smile?" "Because for the first time, Watson, our murderer has touched the ground." The morning's discoveries did not end there. Shortly before noon, a constable approached carrying a small leather case. This was found in the river. The case belonged to Benjamin Sloane. Inside were business papers, receipts, letters, nothing remarkable. Then Holmes noticed a folded document concealed behind the lining. He removed it carefully. The paper proved old, very old, 20 years old perhaps. Its edges had yellowed with age. The writing, however, remained legible. As Holmes read, a remarkable transformation occurred. His expression hardened, then sharpened, finally settled into something approaching astonishment. "Holmes?" He handed me the paper. The document appeared to be a sworn statement, signed by Arthur Blackwood. I read the final paragraph aloud. "Should any harm befall me, responsibility rests with the members of the Westminster Circle. They possess knowledge which they fear becoming public." Silence followed. Even Lestrade appeared stunned. The implication was devastating. Arthur Blackwood had anticipated danger. More than that, he had accused his fellow members. "This changes everything," the inspector said. "Does it?" Holmes replied quietly. Lestrade stared. "Of course it does. Perhaps." The detective folded the document carefully. "What are you thinking?" Holmes looked toward the river. The grey waters flowed endlessly beneath the city. "I am thinking," he said slowly, "that evidence discovered conveniently often deserves suspicion. You think it's false? I think someone wanted us to find it. The distinction mattered enormously. A forged clue could mislead an investigation for weeks or years. Yet something about the document troubled me. If Arthur wrote the truth, then 6 men possessed a motive. Exactly. Holmes nodded, which is why I remain cautious. He slipped the statement into his pocket. By late afternoon, we returned to Baker Street. The case now possessed more questions than ever. Arthur Blackwood had feared his fellow members. 3 of those members were dead. A 4th had just been murdered. And somewhere behind it all lurked a secret old enough to have survived 2 decades. As evening approached, Holmes spent several hours examining maps of London. At precisely 7 o'clock he rose, without explanation, without warning, and began putting on a disguise, a grey wig, tinted spectacles, a worn overcoat. Within minutes he had become an entirely different man. "Where are you going?" "To visit a ghost." "A ghost?" "Arthur Blackwood." I stared. "But Blackwood disappeared 20 years ago." Holmes smiled. "Precisely. Then how can you visit him?" The detective adjusted his collar. "My dear Watson, every vanished man leaves traces behind." He moved toward the door. "What do you expect to find?" Holmes paused. For the briefest instant, his expression grew unusually serious. "The answer to a single question." "What question?" The detective opened the door. "Did Arthur Blackwood disappear?" His eyes gleamed. Or was Arthur Blackwood erased? The door closed behind him, and for the first time since the investigation began, I felt certain that the truth lurking behind the Westminster Circle was far darker than simple murder. Somewhere in London's forgotten past lay a crime capable of destroying reputations, fortunes, and perhaps even governments. And Sherlock Holmes had finally begun digging in exactly the right place. Chapter 6. The Man Who Was Erased. The events of that evening were not fully revealed to me until much later. Holmes departed Baker Street shortly after 7 o'clock, disguised as a retired insurance clerk, a role he inhabited with such perfection that even I might have failed to recognize him had I encountered him upon the street. For nearly 6 hours I remained alone. Outside, London settled into darkness. Fog drifted once more across the city, wrapping the rooftops and chimneys in a pale, shifting veil. From time to time I attempted to occupy myself with reading, yet my thoughts repeatedly returned to the investigation. 4 members of the Westminster Circle were now dead, or presumed dead. 3 remained. Jonathan Vane, Dr. Nathaniel Gryce, Henry Locksley, Member of Parliament. If the pattern continued, One of those men might soon become the next target. Shortly after midnight, the sitting room door opened. Holmes entered. One glance at his face convinced me that his excursion had been successful. Not triumphant, not yet, but successful. You have discovered something. Several things. He removed his disguise piece by piece. Coffee, Watson, if you please. I rang for Mrs. Hudson, who fortunately remained awake. Once we were alone again, Holmes settled into his chair. For a few moments he stared thoughtfully into the fire. Then he spoke. Arthur Blackwood did not disappear. I leaned forward. What? He was made to disappear. The distinction immediately captured my attention. Explain. Holmes accepted the cup Mrs. Hudson had brought and took a sip. 20 years ago, Arthur Blackwood was among the most promising barristers in London. So Vane said. Vane omitted several important details. Naturally, nearly every witness in a Holmes investigation eventually proved less than fully truthful. What details? Blackwood possessed ambition. Hardly a crime. No. Holmes set down his cup, but he also possessed evidence. Evidence of what? The detective's eyes narrowed. That, Watson, is the central question. He rose and crossed to the desk. From his pocket, he produced a collection of notes. I visited the Inns of Court. The legal records? Precisely. He spread several documents before me. Many were faded with age. All concerned Arthur Blackwood. What did you find? An abrupt termination. Meaning? Holmes tapped one paper. In August of 1875, Blackwood was conducting legal research concerning a shipping consortium. I frowned. A shipping company? Several shipping companies. Why is that important? Because among their directors were two familiar names. He pointed. I read them carefully. Sir Alistair Pencombe, Benjamin Sloane. A chill passed through me. Members of the circle. Exactly. Holmes folded his arms. The connection deepens. I studied the records. What happened next? 3 weeks later, Blackwood vanished. The simplicity of the statement somehow made it more disturbing. You think the two events are related? I am increasingly certain. The detective paced slowly. Unfortunately, certainty is not proof. Before further discussion could occur, a knock sounded downstairs. Moments later, Mrs. Hudson entered. There's a gentleman here. At this hour? I asked. Yes, doctor. His name? She hesitated. He refused to give one. Holmes smiled. Show him up. A few moments later, the visitor entered. To my surprise, he was neither a criminal nor a policeman. He appeared to be an elderly clergyman, thin, grey-haired, respectably dressed. Yet the instant Holmes saw him, his expression changed. Recognition. The clergyman noticed it immediately. So you remember me? Indeed. The stranger removed his hat. Then perhaps you understand why I have come. Holmes gestured toward a chair. You may speak freely. The old man sat. For several seconds he appeared uncertain how to begin. Finally he said, I knew Arthur Blackwood. The room became very still. Personally? Holmes asked. Yes. How well? We were friends. I exchanged a glance with Holmes. This was the first person we had encountered who claimed genuine friendship with the vanished barrister. What is your name? I asked. Reverend Samuel Crewe. The clergyman's face carried an air of quiet sadness. You have remained silent for 20 years. Yes. Why? The old man looked down. Fear. The answer surprised me with its honesty. Fear of whom? His gaze lifted. The Westminster Circle. Silence followed. Even Holmes seemed interested. Continue. The Reverend clasped his hands tightly. Arthur came to me shortly before he disappeared. Why? He believed his life was in danger. The words echoed through the room. Holmes did not interrupt. He carried documents. What kind? I never saw them. Did he describe them? Only vaguely. The clergyman swallowed. He claimed they exposed corruption. Corruption involving whom? The circle. For several moments only the crackling fire could be heard. Then Holmes asked the question that mattered most. What happened to those documents? The Reverend closed his eyes. I don't know. You never saw them again? No. Nor Arthur? No. Holmes remained silent. The old man continued. He arranged to meet me on the night he vanished. Did he arrive? No. Instead, a messenger delivered a note. The Reverend reached into his coat. My pulse quickened. Another document, another relic from the past. He handed it to Holmes. The paper was badly worn. The writing had faded. Yet enough remained to read. Samuel, if I fail to appear, assume they have acted. Trust no member of the circle, especially not the physician. Arthur, the physician. Dr. Nathaniel Gryce, the only doctor among the 7 members. Holmes read the note twice, then a third time. His expression became thoughtful. May I keep this? Of course. The Reverend nodded. I should have brought it forward years ago. What prevented you? The old man looked haunted. Because the following morning I received a visitor. Holmes's eyes sharpened. A member of the circle? Yes. Which one? For several seconds the Reverend hesitated. Then he whispered, Henry Locksley, the Member of Parliament. I felt a surge of excitement. At last, a concrete accusation. What did Locksley say? I asked. He advised silence. Threatened you? No. The answer surprised me. He merely informed me that Arthur had left England. You believed him? No. Then why remain silent? The old man stared into the fire. Because I was young. His voice carried deep regret. And because powerful men can be very persuasive. Holmes nodded slowly. The interview continued for another hour. Unfortunately, the Reverend possessed little additional information. Yet one revelation lingered in my mind long after he departed, especially not the physician, those 4 words. As the front door closed behind our visitor, I turned toward Holmes. Gryce, perhaps. You don't believe the note? I believe Arthur wrote it. Then surely, Holmes raised a hand. Careful. You think Blackwood was mistaken? I think dying men frequently suspect the wrong enemy. The reply frustrated me. But we finally possess direction. We possess possibility. The detective moved toward the window. Outside, Baker Street lay silent beneath the fog. Then suddenly he became motionless. I recognized the sign instantly. Holmes, he pointed. Across the street stood a familiar figure, the bearded watcher. Once again, watching, waiting. This time he made no effort to hide. For nearly 10 seconds he remained beneath the lamp. Then he raised his hand and deliberately placed something upon the pavement. After that he turned and walked away. Not hurriedly, not secretly, simply walked into the fog. Holmes seized his coat. Come. We hurried downstairs, crossed Baker Street, reached the spot beneath the lamp. There, resting upon the wet stones, lay a small package wrapped in brown paper. Holmes picked it up carefully. What is it? I suspect, he said quietly, another message. Back upstairs he opened the package. Inside rested a silver coin, number 3, and beneath it a folded card. Holmes unfolded the card slowly. The message consisted of only 6 words. The physician remembers the cellar. For perhaps 5 seconds no one spoke. Then Holmes's expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. Pure recognition. You know what it means. The detective stared at the card. I believe I do. Then tell me. He looked toward the fire. The Westminster Circle possessed a secret. Obviously. No, Watson. His voice had grown unusually serious. A very specific secret. He folded the card. And for the first time, I think I know where it was buried. Outside, the bells of Westminster struck 1 in the morning. 3 members of the circle remained alive. Yet as I watched Holmes's face, I realized something far more alarming. The murderer was no longer merely killing. The murderer was communicating, guiding, selecting which clues reached us. And if Holmes's interpretation proved correct, the phrase, the cellar, might lead directly to the crime that had begun 20 years before, a crime whose consequences were still claiming lives, a crime hidden beneath Westminster itself. Chapter 7. The Cellar, Beneath the River. I have often remarked that Sherlock Holmes possessed a singular ability to transform the smallest clue into a doorway leading toward hidden worlds. A scrap of ash, a footprint, a torn thread. Each could become the beginning of a journey. The message left beneath the lamp in Baker Street was no exception. The physician remembers the cellar. 6 words, nothing more. Yet by breakfast the following morning, Holmes had already constructed 3 separate theories concerning their meaning. He shared none of them. Instead, he spent several hours consulting maps. Not modern maps, old ones, some dating back half a century. These documents soon occupied every available surface within our sitting room. The floor disappeared beneath rolled charts. The sofa supported engineering diagrams. Even the fireplace mantel held yellowed survey records. At length I abandoned my newspaper. Holmes? Yes? What precisely are you searching for? A cellar, I sighed. A cellar somewhere in London. A very large somewhere. Then allow me to refine the statement. The detective pointed toward a map. A cellar near Westminster. Why there? Because the circle derived its name from Westminster. A coincidence, perhaps? Holmes smiled. My dear Watson, coincidence is often merely a fact whose explanation remains hidden. He spread another map upon the table. This one appeared particularly old. The paper had darkened with age. What am I looking at? Westminster in 1875. Immediately my interest sharpened. The year Arthur Blackwood vanished. Holmes tapped a location near the river. Observe. I leaned closer. The map showed a collection of warehouses and commercial buildings that no longer existed. Several had since been demolished. One structure in particular attracted Holmes's attention. What is that? A bonded storage facility. For imports. Precisely. He indicated a notation printed beneath the building. Subterranean storage vaults. A cellar. Several cellars. Holmes nodded. Directly beside the Thames. The significance became obvious. If the Westminster Circle required secrecy, such a location would prove ideal. Remote, private, difficult to observe. When was the building demolished? 1882. Then any evidence would be gone. Most evidence. That answer suggested Holmes already suspected otherwise. Before I could inquire further, a knock interrupted us. Mrs. Hudson entered carrying a telegram. For Mr. Holmes. The detective opened it. As he read, his expression hardened. What is it? Lestrade. Another death. Not yet. The final words carried little comfort. Holmes handed me the telegram. Dr. Gryce reports unusual visitor. Requests immediate assistance. I looked up. The physician. Yes. The man mentioned in Blackwood's note. Holmes was already reaching for his coat. Within 20 minutes we were travelling toward Chelsea, where Dr. Nathaniel Gryce maintained a handsome residence overlooking the river. The physician received us personally. He appeared deeply agitated. Indeed, I had rarely seen a gentleman so obviously shaken. "Thank heaven you've come!" Holmes studied him carefully. "You requested assistance." "Yes." "What occurred?" Gryce led us into his study and closed the door. Only then did he speak. "Someone entered my house." "When?" "Last night." "Did they steal anything?" "No." "Damage anything?" "No." Holmes folded his arms. "Then what precisely happened?" The physician crossed to his desk. From a drawer he removed a small wooden box. "I found this." He opened it. Inside lay a silver coin, number 3. The black triangle gleamed beneath the light. My pulse quickened. The same number we had received only hours earlier. Holmes's expression revealed nothing. "When did you discover it?" "This morning." "Where?" "Upon my pillow." The statement produced immediate silence. Even Lestrade, who had arrived separately moments before us, appeared disturbed. "Upon your pillow?" "Yes." "While you slept?" The physician nodded. "No servant entered?" "None." "No sign of forced entry?" "Nothing." Holmes examined the coin. Then he glanced toward Gryce. "You seem frightened." The physician laughed nervously. "Wouldn't you be?" "Possibly." The detective's gaze sharpened. "Tell me, doctor, do you know why someone sent you this?" Gryce hesitated. A tiny pause, barely perceptible. Yet Holmes noticed. So did I. No. The answer arrived too quickly. The physician was lying. Perhaps not entirely, but enough. Holmes immediately changed direction. "Tell me about Arthur Blackwood." Gryce froze, only briefly, yet the reaction was unmistakable. "What about him?" "You knew him." "Of course." "Well?" The physician moved toward the fireplace. "He disappeared." "Yes. 20 years ago." "Correct." "Do you know why?" "No." Again the answer came too quickly. Holmes remained silent. The physician shifted uncomfortably. Then, quite unexpectedly, he spoke. "I've been wondering something." "What?" Gryce looked directly at Holmes. "What if Arthur Blackwood never disappeared at all?" The room became silent. "What do you mean?" I asked. The physician swallowed. "What if he survived?" For several seconds Holmes said nothing. Then, "You believe Blackwood is the murderer?" "I believe it is possible." "Interesting, isn't it?" The detective's expression remained unreadable. "Very." Yet once again I sensed that Holmes was concealing his true thoughts. The interview concluded shortly thereafter. Outside the residence, Lestrade immediately exploded. "He knows something." "Obviously. Then why not force it out of him?" Holmes sighed. "My dear Lestrade, your solution to every mystery involves arresting someone. It often works. Occasionally," the inspector muttered darkly. We began walking toward the river. For several minutes Holmes remained silent. Then he spoke quietly. "Gryce is afraid." "Naturally." "No." The detective shook his head. "Not naturally." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He is not afraid of being murdered." "Then what is he afraid of?" Holmes stopped. The river flowed beside us, grey and cold beneath the afternoon sky. "He is afraid of being exposed." Those words lingered in my mind. Exposed. Not attacked. Not threatened. Exposed. A subtle distinction, yet one Holmes clearly considered important. By late afternoon we arrived at the location marked upon the old map. Little remained of the original structure. Modern warehouses occupied most of the area. However, one section of foundation still survived, a forgotten fragment trapped between newer buildings. Holmes spent nearly an hour examining the site. At last he discovered a rusted iron door concealed behind stacked crates. The entrance descended below street level. A cellar. Precisely. The lock had long ago deteriorated. A firm push opened the door. Cold air drifted upward from the darkness below. Holmes produced a lantern. Together we descended. Stone steps led into a vast underground chamber. The cellar extended farther than I had expected. Massive brick arches supported the ceiling. Dust covered every surface. The place smelled of damp stone and age. For several minutes we explored silently. Then Holmes stopped. "What is it?" He pointed toward the floor. "A disturbance. Recent. Someone had been here. Very recently." The dust revealed footprints. Narrow footprints. The same unusual width Holmes had observed near Blackfriars Steps. The murderer. Perhaps. The tracks led deeper into the cellar. We followed. Eventually they terminated before a brick wall. Nothing appeared remarkable. No doorway. No passage. Just stone. Yet Holmes crouched immediately. "Ah!" He brushed away dust. A metal ring emerged, hidden in the floor. With considerable effort we pulled. A concealed hatch rose slowly upward. Beneath it lay a smaller chamber, a secret room. My heart began pounding. Inside rested a wooden table, several broken chairs, and upon the wall a symbol, a black triangle, the same symbol engraved upon every coin. For several moments nobody spoke. The room felt strangely oppressive, as though it still remembered events long forgotten. Holmes examined the table, then the walls, then the floor. Suddenly he became very still. I recognized the sign. Another discovery, this time a serious one. "What have you found?" The detective pointed toward a dark stain embedded within the wood. Age had nearly erased it, yet traces remained. Brown, faded, ancient. I needed no explanation. Blood. Very old blood. The implication struck me instantly. 20 years ago. A secret cellar. Arthur Blackwood's disappearance. The Westminster Circle. The pieces were beginning to align. Holmes studied the stain silently. Then he examined the surrounding floor. A moment later he uncovered something else. A small brass button, tarnished with age. Attached to it were faint traces of dark fabric. The detective turned it over. His eyes narrowed. "What is it?" He handed it to me. An inscription had been engraved upon the reverse. 3 initials. A bay. Arthur Blackwood. The air seemed to vanish from the room. For the first time since the investigation began, we possessed physical evidence connecting Blackwood directly to the cellar, and perhaps to whatever had happened there 20 years earlier. Holmes slipped the button into his pocket. Then he looked toward the black triangle painted upon the wall. His expression had become grave, very grave. "What is it, Holmes?" The detective answered softly. "The circle did not meet here." "No?" He shook his head. "They judged here." A chill passed through me. "Judged?" Holmes turned toward the darkness beyond the lantern light. "Yes." His voice echoed faintly through the hidden chamber, and I believe Arthur Blackwood was their final defendant. As we climbed back toward the surface, the magnitude of the discovery settled upon us. The Westminster Circle had not been merely a social club, it had hidden a second purpose, a secret purpose, one involving judgment, secrecy, and perhaps violence. Yet the most disturbing realization came only after we emerged into the fading daylight. If Arthur Blackwood had indeed stood trial in that cellar, then someone still alive knew exactly what had happened there, someone who had attended, someone who feared the truth. And somewhere in London, that person was running out of time. Chapter 8. The Secret Tribunal. There are moments in every great investigation when isolated facts suddenly begin to arrange themselves into a coherent pattern. The discovery of the hidden chamber beneath Westminster was such a moment, not because it answered the mystery, far from it. Indeed, it raised as many questions as it resolved. Yet for the first time we possessed something tangible, a place, a history, a connection between Arthur Blackwood and the Westminster Circle that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. When Holmes and I returned to Baker Street that evening, the detective immediately spread his findings across the table. The brass button, the old maps, copies of shipping records, the mysterious coins, each occupied a precise position in what appeared to be a carefully organized arrangement. I watched for some time before speaking. "You believe Blackwood was brought to that cellar?" "Yes." "Against his will?" "Almost certainly." "And judged?" Holmes steepled his fingers. "That appears increasingly likely." The fire crackled softly. Outside, London lay beneath a cold, moonless sky. "If the Circle conducted some kind of secret trial," I said, "why?" "A question which has occupied me all afternoon." "And," Holmes smiled faintly, "I believe I have discovered the answer." I sat forward immediately. The detective selected one of the shipping records, observed the dates. I examined the document. The entries concerned cargo shipments entering London in 1875. Nothing unusual seemed apparent. "I'm afraid I don't see it." "Naturally." He pointed towards several names. Pencomb, Sloane, Loxley, Grice. Each appeared repeatedly. The members of the Circle. Precisely. And, now observe the cargo. I read the descriptions: textiles, machinery, industrial equipment. Again, nothing remarkable. Then Holmes handed me another document. This one contained customs inspections. Suddenly, the discrepancy became obvious. The quantities did not match. Several shipments listed far fewer goods during inspection than during departure. I looked up. Missing cargo. Holmes nodded. Large quantities. Stolen? Possibly. The detective leaned back, or concealed. The implications were becoming clearer. Smuggling. A possibility. And Blackwood discovered it. Very likely. Holmes folded his arms. Imagine the situation, Watson. A young barrister uncovers evidence linking several influential gentlemen to a criminal enterprise. The picture formed rapidly. He threatens exposure. Perhaps. They panic. Perhaps. And they bring him to the cellar. Holmes remained silent. His lack of agreement concerned me. You don't think it happened that way? Not entirely. Why not? The detective stared thoughtfully into the fire. Because men rarely resort to desperate measures immediately. That answer lingered in my mind. Holmes often reminded me that motives possessed layers. Human beings seldom acted according to simple narratives. Before we could continue, another visitor arrived. This time the caller announced himself openly. Henry Locksley, Member of Parliament, one of the surviving members of the Westminster Circle. The servant showed him into our sitting room. Locksley appeared exactly as I remembered him from public appearances. Tall, distinguished, impeccably dressed. Yet, beneath that polished exterior, I detected strain. The recent murders had clearly affected him. Mr. Holmes, Locksley, the politician remained standing. I understand you have been investigating the Circle, among other matters. I wish to assist. Holmes smiled slightly. How admirable. The remark contained just enough irony to unsettle the man. Locksley cleared his throat. You suspect us. I suspect everyone. Even the dead. Especially the dead. For the first time, genuine confusion crossed the politician's face. Holmes gestured toward a chair. Please sit. Locksley obeyed. The interview began politely. It did not remain so. Tell me about Arthur Blackwood. The politician's expression tightened immediately. I hardly remember him. A lie. A blatant one. Even I recognized it. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Interesting? What is? You are the third man to tell me that. The third? Yes. And? The first two were also lying. The politician's face reddened. I object to that. Naturally. Holmes reached into his desk. Then he placed the brass button upon the table. For the first time, Locksley lost control of himself. Only briefly, yet long enough. His eyes widened. His breathing changed. Fear. Pure fear. Where did you obtain that? The reaction confirmed everything. Holmes's voice became very soft. The cellar. Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Locksley slowly sat back. The confidence had vanished from his face. He suddenly looked older. Much older. What do you know? He asked. Not enough. The politician closed his eyes. For several moments he appeared exhausted. Then he whispered, God help us. Holmes remained silent. Locksley opened his eyes once more. What happened there was never supposed to happen. The room became utterly still. Proceed. The politician looked toward the window, as though gazing backward through 20 years. We believed we were protecting ourselves. From Blackwood? Yes. Why? He possessed evidence. The same phrase repeated once more. Evidence. Always evidence. What kind? Locksley hesitated, then finally surrendered. Fraud. The word seemed almost anticlimactic, yet the expression upon his face suggested otherwise. Explain. The politician clasped his hands together. Several members of the Circle invested in overseas ventures. Illegal ventures? No. Then where was the fraud? Locksley's voice lowered. The reports. Holmes' eyes sharpened. False accounting. Yes. Suddenly the entire matter assumed a new shape. Not smuggling, not theft. Financial deception. A scheme capable of ruining fortunes, destroying reputations, sending influential men to prison. And Blackwood discovered it. The politician nodded. He threatened exposure. What happened next? Locksley swallowed. We invited him to meet us. In the cellar. Yes. My pulse quickened. At last. The truth. Or part of it. We intended to negotiate. Did you? At first. The politician's voice trembled. Then everything went wrong. Holmes leaned forward. What happened? Locksley's face had become pale. We argued. Naturally. He accused us. And? He produced documents. The room seemed to shrink. Every word now mattered. What documents? Proof. Proof of the fraud. Yes. Holmes remained motionless. And then? For several seconds Locksley could not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was little more than a whisper. Blackwood collapsed. Silence. Profound silence. The statement struck me like a blow. Collapsed. Yes. How? We don't know. I stared. That's impossible. Nevertheless, it happened. The politician's hands were shaking visibly now. He was shouting one moment, and the next, he fell. Holmes's gaze never left him. Dead? No. The answer surprised us both. He was alive. Barely. Locksley looked haunted. We summoned Grice, the physician. Again. What did he do? He examined Blackwood, and the politician closed his eyes. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Grice told us Arthur Blackwood would not survive the night. The room became still, very still. Holmes rose slowly. His expression had hardened. Yet no body was ever found. Locksley looked up. Fear returned to his face, a different fear, the fear of a realization long delayed. No. Holmes's voice became cold. No body. The politician stared at him. Neither man spoke. Then suddenly I understood, and the realization sent a chill through my entire body. If Grice had been wrong, if Arthur Blackwood had survived, then the physician's diagnosis 20 years earlier might have altered the course of countless lives. Holmes walked toward the fireplace. For several moments he remained silent. Then he asked one final question. When Blackwood collapsed, who was alone with him? Locksley's face drained of colour. Grice. The answer arrived instantly. Too instantly. Not a memory. A fact long feared. The politician understood its significance the moment he spoke. So did Holmes. The detective turned slowly, and for the first time since this case began, I saw certainty in his eyes. Not complete certainty, but enough. Enough to reveal that somewhere within the tangled web of lies, fraud, death, and vanished evidence, Dr. Nathaniel Grice occupied a position far more important than anyone had previously suspected. The physician remembers the cellar. Indeed he did, because, as Holmes now clearly realized, Nathaniel Grice had been the last man known to see Arthur Blackwood alive, and perhaps the only man who knew what truly happened after the meeting ended. Chapter 9. The Last Man to See Blackwood. The departure of Henry Locksley left Baker Street in a state of oppressive silence. Even the fire seemed subdued, its crackling reduced to a low, uneasy rhythm. Holmes stood motionless for several minutes after the door closed. Then he spoke. Watson. Yes? Prepare yourself. For what? For a necessary confrontation. His tone left little room for doubt. Within the hour we were again in a cab, travelling through a London now thick with evening mist. Holmes had sent a telegram ahead. Its contents I did not know, but I suspected Dr. Nathaniel Grice was already aware of our arrival. He was. The physician received us in a different mood than before. Not fear this time. Resignation. That subtle shift troubled me more than open panic ever could. I expected you, Grice said quietly. Holmes studied him. Did you? Yes. Then you understand why we are here. Grice nodded slowly. I believe I do. Lestrade, who had accompanied us, stepped forward immediately. Dr. Grice, You are requested to clarify your involvement in the events surrounding Arthur Blackwood. The physician exhaled. I cannot change what happened. Holmes raised a hand. We are not here for confessions. Then why? Truth. A pause. Gryce gestured toward the study. Very well. We entered. The room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn despite the early hour. Gryce did not sit. Neither did Holmes. The confrontation began without ceremony. Tell us about the cellar, Holmes said. Gryce closed his eyes briefly. I have told you, it was a meeting. That is not sufficient. The physician looked at him. What more is there? Holmes stepped closer. A man died there. Silence. Then Gryce replied carefully, yes. The single word confirmed what Locksley had implied, but hearing it spoken directly changed its weight entirely. Holmes's voice sharpened. Explain. Gryce moved slowly toward his desk. When Blackwood presented his accusations, tensions escalated. Naturally, the others denied everything. Did you? Gryce hesitated. Yes. A lie. Holmes did not react outwardly, but I noticed his gaze harden. Continue. The physician spoke quietly. Blackwood became agitated. Because he was being dismissed. Because he believed we intended to silence him. Did you? Gryce looked up. No. A pause. But others did. The room tightened. Who? Gryce did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to a cabinet and retrieved a small medical case. I was asked to examine him. Holmes watched carefully, and the physician opened the case. Inside lay several faded instruments. During the argument, Blackwood collapsed, exactly as Locksley described. Gryce nodded. Yes. What caused it? I do not know. Holmes' eyes narrowed. You were a physician. I examined him and concluded that he was dying. The words echoed in the room. From what cause? Gryce hesitated, then spoke. Cardiac failure. A pause. Holmes's tone became dangerously quiet. You are certain? The physician met his gaze. Yes. For several seconds, Holmes said nothing. Then he turned slightly toward Lestrade. Do you believe that? The inspector frowned. I have no reason not to. Holmes exhaled slowly. That is unfortunate. Gryce stiffened. What does that mean? Holmes approached him. Because I do not believe it. Silence fell instantly. The physician stepped back. You are accusing me. I am questioning your conclusion. It was 20 years ago. Yes. Medicine was less precise, yet not entirely unreliable. Gryce's composure began to fracture. I did what I could. Holmes nodded. I am certain you did. Then came the shift. Subtle, but unmistakable. But you did not perform an autopsy. Gryce froze. The silence that followed confirmed everything more clearly than words ever could. Lestrade reacted first. You didn't examine the body. There was no body, Gryce said quickly. Holmes smiled faintly. Exactly. The physician's face drained of colour. You don't understand. Then explain. Gryce struggled for control. After he collapsed, the others panicked. Naturally. They feared scandal. So, they decided to move him. The statement changed the atmosphere instantly. Move him where? I asked. Gryce hesitated, then spoke reluctantly. Into the cellar storage tunnels. Holmes nodded slowly. And then? The physician swallowed. I was not present when they left. Convenient. Gryce looked sharply at him. It is the truth. Holmes's voice remained calm. I am sure you believe it is. A pause. Then, tell me, Doctor, when you left Arthur Blackwood, was he alive? Gryce hesitated. A fraction too long. Then, yes. The answer was immediate, too immediate, and therefore unconvincing. Holmes turned slightly toward me. Watson, what do you observe? I looked between them. He is uncertain. Correct. Holmes stepped closer. You are lying, Doctor. Gryce shook his head. No. Then answer again. Was Arthur Blackwood alive when you left him? Silence. Longer this time. Then, Quietly, "I do not know." The words altered everything. For the first time, uncertainty entered the physician's account. Holmes nodded once. "That is closer to the truth." Gryce lowered his gaze. "I left him in the cellar. Why?" "Because I was ordered to." "By whom?" Gryce hesitated, then spoke one name: Henry Locksley. A silence followed that was almost physical in its weight. Lestrade stared. "That is not what Locksley told us." "No," Holmes agreed softly, "it is not." The contradiction was complete. Two accounts, both incompatible, one of them false, perhaps both. Holmes walked slowly to the window. Outside, fog thickened into a dense grey wall. "The problem," he said quietly, "is that every man involved in that night is now unreliable." Gryce spoke urgently. "Because we were afraid." Holmes turned. "Fear explains silence. It explains confusion as well, but not inconsistency." The physician said nothing. Holmes approached him once more. "Dr. Gryce." "Yes. Someone has been killing the members of the Westminster Circle." "I know, and you are still alive." Gryce stiffened. "I have done nothing wrong." "That is not the question." Holmes leaned in slightly. "The question is why you have not yet been judged." The implication struck the room like ice. Lestrade shifted uneasily. Gryce looked suddenly exhausted. "I have told you everything." Holmes studied him for a long moment. Then quietly, "No." The physician looked up sharply. "You are withholding something." Gryce shook his head. "No." Holmes turned away. "Very well." A pause. Then he added, "For now." We left shortly thereafter. Outside, Lestrade finally broke the silence. "You don't believe him." "I believe parts of his story." "Which parts?" Holmes adjusted his coat. "The dangerous ones." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the river. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "It means, Watson, that if Dr. Gryce is telling the truth about Arthur Blackwood collapsing—" He paused. "Then someone else ensured he never rose again." The meaning settled slowly, then fully. Blackwood had not simply disappeared. He had been removed, and whether by death or concealment, someone had made certain no trace remained. As we walked back into the fog, one fact became unavoidable. Every surviving member of the Westminster Circle now stood under suspicion. Yet only one question remained unanswered. Not who killed Arthur Blackwood, but whether Arthur Blackwood had ever truly stopped living at all. Chapter 10. The Bearded Watcher Speaks. The fog that night was unlike any we had yet encountered. It did not merely obscure London, it seemed to absorb it. Even the gas lamps appeared weakened, their glow reduced to trembling halos suspended in the grey void. Holmes walked briskly, too briskly for comfort. I had learned to recognize this pace. It was not excitement alone, nor urgency. It was the gait of a man who believed he was approaching a point of irreversible clarity. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To end uncertainty." That answer, as usual, explained nothing. We moved south toward the river, following narrow streets that seemed to rearrange themselves in the fog. Twice I thought I saw the bearded watcher ahead of us, only for him to dissolve into mist before I could be certain. Holmes did not chase him this time. He followed, deliberately, as though he knew exactly where the path would lead. At last we reached a deserted stretch near Blackfriars, where the river's presence was felt more than seen. The air smelled of damp stone and iron, and there, beneath a flickering lamp, stood the man, the bearded watcher, waiting. This time he did not retreat. Holmes stopped several paces away. "Good evening," Holmes said calmly. The man studied him. "You expected me," the watcher replied. "Eventually." A faint smile touched the stranger's lips. "You are persistent." "I am thorough." The watcher glanced at me briefly. "And you brought your chronicler, Dr. Watson." "I know." That single statement unsettled me more than I cared to admit. Holmes stepped forward slightly. "You have been observing us for some time." "Yes." "Why?" The man exhaled slowly. Because you were looking in the wrong direction. A pause. Holmes tilted his head. Explain. The watcher removed his hat. In the dim light, his face appeared older than I had first assumed. Tired. Marked by something deeper than age. I was at Blackfriars Steps the night Sloane died. Holmes's expression did not change. Go on. I saw the body before it was discovered. You did not report it. No. Why? A long silence. Then, because I was not certain what I had witnessed. Holmes nodded once. That is often the excuse of the innocent. The man gave a faint, humourless smile. Or the cautious. The river shifted somewhere behind us, a slow, unseen movement. Holmes continued. You have been following us since Russell Square. Yes. You dropped coins. Yes. With numbers. The watcher inclined his head. To guide you. Guide us toward what? The man hesitated, then spoke. Toward what happened in the cellar. The temperature of the air seemed to drop. Holmes remained perfectly still. Then you were present. I was nearby. Define nearby. The watcher looked away. I was not invited. That answer carried weight. Holmes' voice sharpened slightly. You were excluded from the circle. Yes. Then you are not a member. No. A pause. Then why were you there? The watcher's eyes darkened. Because I was Arthur Blackwood's clerk. The word struck like a physical blow. Even Holmes showed the faintest flicker of surprise. You worked for him? Yes. When? During the final months before his disappearance. I felt a chill run through me. At last a witness from the closest possible position. Holmes stepped closer. Tell us what happened in the cellar. The man inhaled slowly. I followed him that night, without permission. He suspected danger. He asked me to remain nearby. Holmes nodded. And? I waited above the cellar entrance. You did not enter. No. Continue. The watcher's voice grew quieter. I heard shouting. From how many men? All of them. Then, a struggle. Holmes' eyes narrowed. And Blackwood. The man hesitated, then spoke carefully. He came out, alive. The statement altered everything. Lestrade, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. He came out. Yes. Holmes' voice became dangerously calm. Explain. The watcher looked directly at him. I saw him climb the steps from the cellar. Was he injured? Shaken, breathing heavily, but alive. A pause. Then what? The watcher swallowed. Then Dr. Gryce followed him. Silence fell. Holmes did not speak immediately. When he did, his voice was colder. And? The others remained below. Who? Pencombe, Sloane, Locksley. Lestrade interrupted sharply. You are contradicting established testimony. The watcher turned toward him. Whose testimony? The inspector faltered. Holmes raised a hand. Continue. The man nodded. Gryce reached him at the top of the steps. And then? A long pause. Then? Blackwood collapsed again. Holmes' eyes narrowed. Again? Yes. You are saying this twice occurred. The watcher nodded. Once in the cellar. Once above it. A silence followed. Then Holmes spoke softly. That detail has never been mentioned. The watcher looked almost apologetic, because no one else saw it clearly. Holmes' gaze hardened. And you did. Yes. Go on. The man's voice dropped further. Gryce examined him, and concluded. He was dying. A repetition. The same phrase, again and again. Holmes stepped back slightly. You are certain Gryce made that diagnosis? I heard him say it. And Blackwood? The watcher hesitated. Then, I do not know what happened to him after that. Holmes turned away. For several seconds he said nothing. Then suddenly, you followed the circle afterwards. Yes. Why? The man's expression darkened. Because I believed they had killed him. And now? A pause. Now I believe something worse. Holmes turned sharply. Worse than murder? The watcher nodded slowly. I believe they hid him. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fog seemed to pause. Holmes's voice dropped. Explain, the watcher's answer came quietly. If Arthur Blackwood survived that night, he paused, then he would know everything they did. Lestrade frowned. That would make him a witness. Yes, Holmes said slowly. Not a victim. The watcher nodded. And witnesses do not remain silent forever. A new possibility formed in the air, one far more disturbing than murder. Holmes stepped forward again. Where is he now? The watcher shook his head. I do not know. You are suggesting he is alive. I am suggesting, the man replied carefully, that the circle may have preserved him. Lestrade looked incredulous. Preserved? The watcher met his gaze. As leverage. A silence followed. Holmes turned slowly toward the river. For several moments he remained motionless. Then he spoke. That would explain the coins. I frowned. How? Holmes' voice remained low. A numbering system. For what? Control? The implication struck me gradually. Not a killing list, not a death sequence, but something far more calculated. A system of tracking, of management, of silence. The watcher stepped back slightly. I have told you what I know. Holmes turned toward him. Not everything. The man hesitated. Then, no. One final question. Yes? Holmes' eyes narrowed. Who gave you the coins? A pause. A very long pause. Then the watcher answered. The seventh man. The words froze the air. Lestrade stepped forward. The seventh member of the circle. The watcher shook his head. No. Holmes spoke quietly. Arthur Blackwood. Silence. The watcher nodded once. Before he disappeared. A moment passed. Then another. Holmes' expression changed subtly. Not surprise. Understanding. At last. For the first time, the structure of the case began to resolve into something coherent. Arthur Blackwood had not merely been a victim, he had been a participant, perhaps even the originator, and somewhere in the hidden machinery of lies, disappearances, and controlled truths, his influence had never truly ended. Holmes turned away from the river. His voice, when it came, was calm. Watson. Yes? I believe we have been misled from the beginning. The watcher stepped back into the fog, and this time we did not follow, because Holmes had finally realized something more important than pursuit. He had realized direction, and that direction was no longer backward into the past. It was forward, toward a living truth still operating in the present. Somewhere in London, Arthur Blackwood was either dead or still orchestrating a judgment that had begun 20 years ago and never truly ended. Chapter 11. The Living Verdict. The fog did not lift the following morning. If anything, it thickened. London seemed less like a city and more like a sealed chamber in which events were unfolding unseen, muffled by layers of grey silence. Holmes had not slept. When I entered the sitting room shortly after dawn, I found him standing before the fireplace, the documents from the case arranged in an exact circle upon the table. Coins, maps, notes, statements, even the brass button from the cellar. Everything had been placed with deliberate geometry. You have been working through the night, I observed. I have been listening. To what? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he tapped the arrangement on the table. Patterns, Watson. Patterns that were previously obscured by noise. I approached. What patterns? He picked up the coin marked with number 3. Consider this. Yes, each victim is numbered. Correct. Yet the numbering is inconsistent. I frowned. What do you mean? Holmes laid the coins in sequence. 3, 5, 7. Then paused. Missing numbers, I said. Exactly. Lestrade, who had arrived moments earlier, leaned forward. So, there are more victims coming. Holmes shook his head. Not necessarily. Then what? The numbers are not chronological. That statement immediately changed my interpretation. Holmes continued. They are positional. Positions in what? Not a list. A pause. A structure. He pointed to the cellar map. 7 positions. The implication struck me slowly. 7 members. Holmes nodded. The Westminster Circle was not merely a society. He paused. It was a tribunal. Lestrade frowned. A tribunal for what purpose? Holmes turned toward him. Judgment. The word hung heavily in the air. I felt a cold unease begin to form. You are suggesting they acted as judges. I am suggesting they believed they were judges. Of whom? Holmes placed Arthur Blackwood's brass button at the centre of the table. Of him, silence. Then Lestrade spoke. But Blackwood was one of them. Yes. So they judged one of their own. Holmes nodded. And that is where the structure becomes unstable. I studied the arrangement on the table. If Blackwood was judged, he must have been accused of something. Holmes' eyes sharpened. Correct. Fraud. That was Locksley's account. And the watcher suggested otherwise. Holmes nodded. Indeed. A pause. Then he said quietly, There is a contradiction at the heart of this case. I looked at him. What contradiction? Holmes picked up the note from Blackwood's clergyman, especially not the physician. 2 narratives exist. He held up the note. One in which Gryce is protector. He placed it down. And one in which Gryce is executioner. Lestrade muttered. Then which is true? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window. Outside, the fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. That, he said quietly, is what we are about to discover. At that moment, Mrs. Hudson entered, unusually pale. Mr. Holmes, there is a gentleman downstairs. Holmes turned. Name. He refuses again. Holmes sighed. Send him up. A moment later, the visitor entered. The room fell silent immediately. Dr. Nathaniel Gryce. But not the man we had seen before. This version of him appeared altered, composed, controlled, as though some internal decision had finally been made. Holmes studied him carefully. You have come voluntarily. Yes. Why? Gryce looked at the table, at the arrangement of coins, then at Holmes. Because I can no longer remain silent. Lestrade straightened. About time. Holmes did not move. Proceed. Gryce took a slow breath. Everything I told you was incomplete. Holmes nodded once. I suspected as much. The physician's eyes flickered. You already knew. I know patterns of omission. Gryce exhaled, then spoke. There was no fraud. Silence. Lestrade frowned. You just said, let him continue. Holmes interrupted. Gryce nodded gratefully. There was no fraud. He repeated it. The circle did not discover corruption. A pause. It created it. The room tightened instantly. I felt my attention sharpen. Holmes stepped forward slightly. Explain. Gryce's voice lowered. The circle was formed for influence. Yes. But over time it became something else. What? A mechanism. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Mechanism for what? Gryce hesitated, then spoke the word. Control. Silence followed. He continued. Blackwood discovered this before any of us realized the extent. How? He saw the records we thought were secure. Holmes nodded slowly. And then? Gryce swallowed. He threatened to expose the entire structure. Which structure? Gryce looked directly at Holmes. The circle was not 7 men acting together. A pause. It was one system. The words hung in the air. Holmes' expression changed subtly. Understanding deepened. Gryce continued. Each member controlled access to a different layer of financial networks, legal influence, and political pressure. Lestrade frowned. That sounds like ordinary corruption. It is not, Holmes said quietly. Gryce nodded. It was coordinated. By whom? Gryce hesitated, then answered, Arthur Blackwood. Silence shattered the room. I stared at him. Holmes did not react outwardly, but his eyes sharpened. That is not what we have been led to believe. I know. Gryce took a step forward. But it is the truth. Lestrade shook his head. You are saying the victim organized the circle? Yes. Holmes interjected calmly. And then they judged him. Gryce nodded. Because he had gone too far. Too far in what way? Gryce hesitated again, then spoke quietly. He was using it to erase people. The words struck the room like a blade. Erase, I repeated. Gryce nodded. Entire identities. Records. Witnesses. Financial histories. Holmes's gaze hardened. And when the circle discovered this, we turned against him. A pause. All of you. Gryce nodded. Yes. Holmes turned slightly. And in the cellar, Gryce looked away. We confronted him. Then what happened? The physician closed his eyes. He tried to flee. Holmes stepped forward. And collapsed. Gryce hesitated, then answered, No. Silence. No? Gryce shook his head. He was stopped. A long pause. Then Holmes spoke softly. By whom? Gryce's voice was almost inaudible. By all of us. The implication settled slowly, then fully. Holmes turned away. For several moments he said nothing. Then he spoke. So Blackwood was not a victim. Gryce nodded. He was the system's creator. Holmes' voice was quiet. And you eliminated him. Gryce did not correct him. That silence was answer enough. Lestrade looked shaken. Then why the coins? Holmes answered immediately. Because systems do not disappear. He turned back to Gryce. They persist. Gryce nodded. Yes. Holmes continued. And someone has been continuing Blackwood's system. Gryce stiffened. That is what I feared. Silence fell again. Holmes looked toward the table. The numbered coins are not deaths, he spoke slowly. They are positions within an ongoing structure. Gryce whispered. A living verdict. Holmes nodded. Someone is continuing the tribunal. Lestrade looked stunned. Who? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward the fog-filled window. Then quietly, the only question remaining is whether Arthur Blackwood truly died in that cellar. A pause. Or whether he became the judge he always intended to be. Outside, the fog shifted like a breathing thing, and for the first time since the investigation began, the case was no longer about murders. It was about authority, and who still possessed it. Chapter 12. Westminster's Final Judgment. The moment Dr. Gryce left Baker Street, the room felt emptied of certainty. What remained was something far more dangerous. Contradiction arranged neatly into competing truths. Holmes stood motionless for several minutes after the door closed. Then he turned toward the table and began dismantling everything. The coins were separated again, the maps folded, the notes resorted, not into order, but into conflict. Lestrade watched him uneasily. You don't believe him, the inspector said at last. Holmes did not look up. I believe he believes himself. That's not the same thing. No, Holmes agreed. It is not. I studied him carefully. Then what now? Holmes placed the brass button at the center of the table. Now we identify who benefits from both versions of the truth. Lestrade frowned. That's the same principle you always use. Yes, Holmes said quietly, and it has never failed me. He turned toward the window. Outside, London remained wrapped in fog so dense it seemed to erase distance itself. 3 interpretations remain, Holmes said. 3? I asked. Gryce's version, Locksley's version, and the Watcher's version. Lestrade crossed his arms. And which is correct? Holmes turned. None are complete. A silence followed. Then he added, but one is deliberate. That word shifted the room. Deliberate, not mistaken, not confused, designed. Holmes moved to the map of Westminster. His finger traced the river's edge. The cellar was not simply a meeting place. He paused. It was a stage. Lestrade frowned. A stage for what? Holmes looked up. For a judgment that was never meant to end. I felt a cold sensation form at the base of my spine. You mean the circle is still active? I said. Holmes nodded. Or someone is acting in its name. Lestrade shook his head. This is madness. No, Holmes said calmly. It is structure. He tapped the map again. 7 positions. 7 coins, 7 names. Then he added, and 1 absence. I looked at him. Blackwood. Holmes nodded. The missing judge. A knock sounded downstairs. Mrs. Hudson entered almost immediately, pale again. Mr. Holmes, there is a gentleman insisting. Holmes interrupted. Let him in. This time, however, there was no hesitation, no delay. The man who entered did not belong to the same world as Gryce or Locksley. He was younger, sharper, and carried himself with a strange stillness, as though movement itself was unnecessary. Holmes studied him instantly, then said, You are not the bearded watcher. The man shook his head. No. Then who are you? A pause. I am the reason you were watched. Silence fell. Lestrade stepped forward. Explain yourself. The man removed his coat slowly. Underneath he wore the plain dress of a legal clerk, or something similar. My name is Edward Morrow. Holmes narrowed his eyes slightly. That name appears nowhere in our records. It wouldn't. Why not? Morrow looked at Holmes directly. Because I was never a member of the Circle. A pause. I was its record keeper. The room changed immediately. Even Lestrade seemed to understand the importance of that statement. Holmes stepped closer. Go on. Morrow produced a small ledger from inside his coat. Worn, faded, carefully preserved. I kept the true accounts. He placed it on the table, not gently, deliberately. Holmes did not touch it yet. Whose orders? He asked. Morrow hesitated. Then, Arthur Blackwood's. A silence followed so complete it felt unnatural. Holmes finally spoke. You are suggesting Blackwood controlled everything? Yes, even the cellar meeting. Morrow nodded. That was not a trial. Then what was it? The clerk looked down. A transfer. Lestrade frowned. A transfer of what? Morrow met his gaze. Authority. The word struck harder than any accusation so far. Holmes finally opened the ledger. His eyes moved quickly. Too quickly. As though he already understood what he might find. Line after line passed. Names, dates, transactions, and annotations. After several minutes he stopped. His expression had changed. Not surprise, recognition. You are correct, Holmes said quietly. Lestrade blinked. About what? Holmes turned the ledger slightly. Blackwood was not judged by the Circle. A pause. He was succeeded by it. Silence. Morrow nodded once. Yes. Lestrade shook his head. This is absurd. He died. Holmes did not look at him. Did he? The question hung. Morrow spoke again. He did not collapse. Holmes turned sharply. Explain. Morrow exhaled. He staged it. The room went still. Why? I asked. Morrow looked at me. Because he needed to disappear from the system he created. Holmes' voice sharpened. And leave it running. Morrow nodded. Yes. Lestrade looked stunned. That makes no sense. It does, Holmes said quietly. If the system required a judge, the judge must also be absent. Morrow nodded. Exactly. Holmes closed the ledger. Blackwood did not die in the cellar. No. He removed himself. Yes. And the Circle? Morrow hesitated. Continued. Holmes stepped back. And then fractured. Morrow nodded. Over time. Silence. Then Holmes spoke softly. And someone has been restoring it. Morrow looked away. Yes. Lestrade frowned. Who? Morrow hesitated, then said, The physician. A stillness fell across the room. Holmes did not move, but something in his expression changed. Gryce. Again, always returning. Morrow continued quickly. Gryce was not just a witness. What was he? Holmes asked. The keeper of the exit. Silence. I frowned. The exit? Morrow nodded. The only man who knew how Blackwood left the system. Holmes stepped forward slowly. And now he is being targeted. Morrow nodded again. Yes. Lestrade looked confused. But the murders are corrections, Holmes interrupted. He turned toward the table. The coins are not victims. A pause. They are restored positions. Morrow nodded. Someone is rebuilding the circle. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Or completing it. A long silence followed. Then Holmes spoke. Where is Blackwood now? Morrow hesitated, then answered quietly. He never left London. The room seemed to contract. Holmes turned sharply. Impossible. Morrow shook his head. He remained within the system he created. Lestrade whispered, Alive? Morrow did not answer directly. Instead he said, Hidden. Holmes exhaled slowly, then spoke. Watson. Yes? Prepare yourself. For what? Holmes turned toward the window. For the first time, his voice carried something close to finality. For Westminster's final judgment. Night fell quickly after that. And for once, even Holmes did not immediately move. Instead he waited, as though the final piece of the puzzle had not yet arrived. But he knew it would, because somewhere beneath the fog of London, within the forgotten architecture of the city itself, the Westminster Circle was no longer a memory. It was still operating, and its final decision had not yet been made. Not about the past, but about the present, and about who among us would be allowed to remain. Chapter 13. The Bridge of Truth. The fog that night did not behave like weather. It behaved like intention. Holmes stood at the window of Baker Street for nearly an hour after Edward Morrow's departure, watching London dissolve into its usual half-existence. Then he spoke. We go to Westminster. Lestrade frowned. Now? Now. And what exactly do you expect to find there? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he took the silver coins and placed them into his coat pocket. The end of a pattern, he said at last. We departed into the night. Westminster Bridge was almost unrecognizable beneath the fog. The river below moved like ink poured through stone. No stars, no moon, only the distant pulse of gas lamps struggling against the mist. Holmes walked directly to the centre of the bridge and stopped. I noticed it immediately. He was not looking at the river. He was listening. Lestrade shifted beside me. This is madness, he muttered. No, Holmes said quietly without turning. It is timing. A faint sound drifted through the fog. Footsteps, not ours. Holmes turned slightly. Come forward, he said calmly. For a moment nothing happened. Then a figure emerged. Slowly, deliberately. A man in a dark overcoat, beard trimmed now, hat removed, no longer hiding. The watcher. But changed. Less shadow, more presence. Holmes did not move. I should have known you would choose this place, Holmes said. The man nodded. Yes. Lestrade stepped forward. You are under arrest. Holmes raised a hand. Wait. The inspector hesitated. The watcher looked at Holmes. You have been piecing it together incorrectly, he said. Holmes studied him. Have I? Yes. A pause. You believed there were 7 positions. I still do. The watcher shook his head. There were never 7 men. Silence. Then Holmes said softly, Explain. The watcher stepped closer. Blackwood did not build a circle of equals. Holmes did not blink. He built a hierarchy. The river moved beneath us, unseen. The watcher continued. 7 roles, not 7 people. Holmes' eyes narrowed. Roles. Yes. Lestrade frowned. This is meaningless. The watcher turned slightly toward him. It is everything. Then back to Holmes. The physician, the financier, the solicitor, the politician, the naval officer, the industrialist. He paused. And the clerk. Holmes's expression sharpened slightly. Edward Morrow. The watcher nodded. And above them all, a pause. The architect. Holmes spoke quietly. Blackwood. The watcher shook his head. No. Silence. Then, Arthur Blackwood was never the architect. A chill passed through me. Then who was? I asked. The watcher turned fully toward us. For the first time, his voice softened. You are standing above him. We looked around instinctively. Holmes did not. Instead, he slowly raised his eyes toward the bridge structure itself. The iron framework above us groaned faintly in the wind. Lestrade frowned. "There is no one above us," Holmes whispered. "There is." And then I saw it. A faint movement above the bridge's upper span. A silhouette. Stationary. Watching. Not fleeing. Not hiding. Present. Holmes spoke without looking away. "Dr. Nathaniel Gryce." Silence shattered. Lestrade reacted instantly. "That's impossible." But Holmes was already moving. "Watson, stay back." Too late. A voice came from above. Calm, measured, controlled. "I was wondering when you would look upward, Mr. Holmes." Gryce. But different. No longer the shaken physician. Something else entirely. Holmes stopped. "You were never afraid," Holmes said quietly. "No." A pause. "I was patient." Lestrade shouted upward. "You are under arrest." A faint laugh echoed through the fog. "Arrest me for what?" Holmes stepped forward slightly. "For murder." A pause. Then Gryce replied, "I have never killed anyone." Silence. Holmes narrowed his eyes. "The bodies say otherwise." "The bodies," Gryce replied, "are misdirection." Holmes' voice hardened. "Explain." Gryce's silhouette remained still above. "You have been tracing deaths." "Yes, but there have been none." A pause. Only the river moved. Then Holmes said quietly, "Then what have we been witnessing?" A long silence. Finally Gryce spoke. "Reassignment." Lestrade frowned. "That makes no sense." Holmes did not look away. "Continue." Gryce's voice carried now with clarity. "Arthur Blackwood did not create a system of fraud." A pause. "He created a system of accountability." The fog thickened. 7 roles. 7 functions, a structure designed to monitor influence itself. Holmes' eyes narrowed. "And you were its physician," Gryce answered. "I was its stabilizer." Silence. Then Holmes said quietly, "And when Blackwood disappeared?" The answer came instantly. "I continued his work." Lestrade shook his head. "This is insanity," Gryce continued. "The coins are not deaths." Holmes said softly, "Then what are they?" Gryce replied, "Acknowledgements." Silence fell again. Holmes spoke slowly. "You are not eliminating members." "No." "You are correcting failures." "Yes." Lestrade stepped forward angrily. "You are confessing to murder." Gryce's voice remained calm. "I am correcting deviations." Holmes' expression tightened. "And Benjamin Sloane?" "Removed from function." "Sir Alistair?" "Reassigned." "Captain Holloway?" A pause. Disrupted. Holmes stepped forward. "And Blackwood?" Silence. Then Gryce said quietly, "He chose exile." The words settled like stone. Holmes spoke softly. "Then the bearded watcher was right." Gryce answered, "There is no watcher." A pause. "Only continuity." Holmes turned slowly. "Then why are you here?" Gryce's voice softened. "Because the system is collapsing." Lestrade frowned. "Collapsing?" Gryce continued. "The circle no longer agrees on interpretation." Holmes whispered, "Division." "Yes." The fog seemed to deepen. Gryce spoke again. "And when systems divide," a pause, "they require final resolution." Holmes stepped forward. Westminster's final judgment. Gryce did not deny it. Instead he said, "You have arrived at the correct location." Holmes looked upward. "Then show yourself." For a long moment nothing happened. Then footsteps. Above us, descending. Slow, deliberate. A figure appeared from the upper structure of the bridge and stepped down into view. Older than I expected. Calm, composed, and unmistakably authoritative. Arthur Blackwood, or what remained of him. Lestrade staggered back. "That's impossible." Holmes did not move. Blackwood looked down at us. "No," he said quietly. "It is not." Silence. Holmes spoke softly. "You never died." "I did," Blackwood replied. A pause, but only in the way the circle required. Gryce looked upward. "You were not meant to return." Blackwood nodded. "I did not return." He looked at Holmes. "I remained." Holmes' eyes narrowed. In control. Blackwood did not deny it. Instead, he said, in maintenance. Silence stretched. Then Holmes asked the final question. Why the murders? Blackwood's voice was calm. There were no murders. A pause. Only corrections to a system you are finally beginning to see. Holmes stepped forward. And Grice, Blackwood replied. He is the last stabilizer. Grice did not speak. The river below us moved endlessly. Holmes closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. Then there is only one question left. Blackwood nodded. Yes. Holmes spoke quietly. Does the system continue? A long silence. Then Blackwood said, That is no longer for me to decide. He looked at Grice. Grice looked at Holmes. And Holmes understood. The circle had not ended. It had evolved beyond ownership, beyond control, beyond any single mind. Holmes turned slowly to me, and for the first time in this entire investigation, I saw something unfamiliar in his expression. Not confusion, not doubt, but recognition of something too large to dismantle cleanly. He spoke quietly. Watson. Yes? This case was never about murder. I waited. It was about governance. The fog swallowed the river beneath us, and somewhere in the distance Westminster's bells began to ring, not in warning, but in judgment. And no one, not even Sherlock Holmes, could say who the final verdict would ultimately serve. The official report never mentioned Westminster Bridge, nor did it mention Arthur Blackwood, or Dr. Nathaniel Grice, or the man who had once called himself the Bearded Watcher. Scotland Yard filed the entire affair under a single heading, Unresolved Incident, River District Inquiry, a convenient fiction, and one that Holmes did not challenge, for once. It was 3 days later when I returned to Baker Street and found Holmes seated by the fire, his hands folded, the instruments of deduction absent from the table, no coins, no maps, no notes, only silence. Holmes, I said carefully, the case is closed. He did not look up. Is it? Lestrade had insisted on closure. Officially, there were no bodies attributable to any coordinated system, no evidence of an organized tribunal, no trace of Grice's alleged continuity structure, only confusion and fog. Always fog. I expected satisfaction, I admitted. Holmes gave a faint, humourless smile. Then you misunderstand satisfaction, Watson. I took a seat. You believe there was something else. He finally looked at me. I believe we only saw what someone allowed us to see. A pause. Then the circle still exists, I said. No, Holmes replied softly. Not as a circle. Then what? Holmes stood and walked to the window. Outside, London moved on in its ordinary rhythm. Carriages, pedestrians, gaslight, commerce. Ordinary life layered over extraordinary uncertainty. A system does not survive by remaining unchanged, he said. It survives by becoming invisible. That statement lingered. I considered the events again. Blackwood, Grice, Locksley, the Watcher, the coins, the cellar beneath the river. All of it now felt less like a solved puzzle and more like the edge of something intentionally concealed. Was Blackwood alive? I asked. Holmes was silent for a long time. Then, I do not know. The answer unsettled me more than certainty ever could. And Grice? Holmes turned slightly. I believe he was honest about one thing. What? That the system is unstable. A pause. And unstable systems correct themselves. A knock interrupted us. Mrs. Hudson entered hesitantly. Mr. Holmes, there is something outside. Holmes did not move. What kind of something? A package. We descended together. Outside Baker Street, resting neatly upon the step, lay a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. No address. No sender. Only a single marking pressed into the wax seal. A black triangle. Lestrade, who had arrived earlier than expected, stiffened immediately. "Oh no," he muttered. Holmes knelt and opened it carefully. Inside was a single object, a silver coin, number 1. We all stared at it. Then Holmes turned it over. There was something new, an inscription that had not been present before. Fresh, deliberate. 3 words. The system remains silence followed. Lestrade broke it first. This has to stop. Holmes rose slowly. No, he said quietly. That is the point. I looked at him. You're not going to pursue this further? For the first time since I had known him, Sherlock Holmes hesitated. Then he spoke. I cannot pursue something that does not have a fixed shape. A pause. It will not remain still long enough to be solved. That admission struck me deeply. Holmes, the man who turned chaos into structure, was acknowledging a case that refused structure altogether. We returned inside. The coin remained on the table. No one touched it again. That night, I found Holmes still awake. He sat by the fire, unmoving, as though listening to something no one else could hear. Holmes, I said quietly, what happens now? He did not look at me. Now? He repeated. Yes. A long pause followed. Then he answered, Now we wait for it to choose its next form. I frowned. That is not an answer. Holmes finally looked at me. No, he said softly. It is a warning. Outside, the fog thickened once more over London, and somewhere within it, beneath its streets, its bridges, its forgotten foundations, the Westminster system continued to exist. Not as a conspiracy, not as a society, but as something far more enduring, a mechanism that outlived its creators and adapted itself to survive. Holmes extinguished the lamp, and in the darkness that followed, I realized something I have never been able to forget. The case was never solved. It simply stopped revealing itself. And in London, that is often the same thing.